Welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacey Moss, the host of the podcast and the president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. The Igniting Impact podcast is an opportunity to share what our clients and what we do daily to impact our world. We want to highlight this essential work and the work that is done for customers, clients, and stakeholders that is changing lives despite the many daily challenges that are faced. On today's episode, we have three guests with us, actually myself, Kassie Graham, and Allison Olson. We're here today to discuss change management and also how learning or training plays a role in change management. This is a special episode because it's just our team and people that I've worked with for many years. Let's get started by getting to know everyone just a little bit more. Okay, so a good chance now to get to know myself. This is Stacey Moss again, the host of the podcast. And since I'm actually sharing some information today on change management and OCM, I thought I'd share a bit about myself as well. So like I've said before, I'm the president of our management consulting firm, Public Knowledge. I've actually been at Public Knowledge now for 10 years. And when I started, I was a management consultant, brought on to work on Medicaid projects, but also to launch our child welfare practice because it wasn't one that we had done before. And I have spent the last 10 years working with the most amazing individuals and colleagues and clients that I've ever met in my life. But I lovingly joke that I'm actually a retired attorney. I still have my JD and I still use it daily, but I don't practice law anymore. Before Public Knowledge and at the beginning of my career, right after law school, I actually started in private practice. I worked at a small firm in a small community where you did a lot of different work, but most of my work focused on family law and child welfare law. And I found that I had a love and a passion for representing children and parents in the child welfare system and the child welfare field. So after working in private practice, I actually moved to the Attorney General's office and was an assistant attorney general representing any of the human service agencies. So that included Department of Health, Department of Family Services, Department of Transportation. But the one that I worked with the most was Department of Family Services. And I actually filed termination of parental rights cases for the agency. I helped advise the agency. I focused specifically on child care and the child welfare system. And got to get involved in a lot of different things like CFSRs and just great experience and exposure in that role to what social workers do day in and day out and how hard that job is. After the Attorney General's office, I actually left to become the agency director of the Guardian Ad Litem program. So this is attorneys that represent children in court. And it was at a time of the program where we're moving from a panel of attorneys to more employees and more dedicated focus. We were setting standards and training, and it was an absolute joy to be able to work with the attorneys and to be able to work in the system and create something really powerful for our state. I was there for about 6 years, and that was the job that I left to come to Public Knowledge. And really, I was loving the leadership and the administration part of that work, and I love representing kids, but I was ready to try to make a difference at a more programmatic or policy level, at a national level, which was one of the main reasons why I left that job for Public Knowledge. So I'd been running Public Knowledge since January of 2020. And during that time, we've undergone a lot of change. But the thing that has kept me here is that I really get the privilege of supporting our team. I'm definitely not at the center of everything. I definitely am in a support role. And that is really how I like to serve. That's my passion and my love. So it's a really wonderful opportunity for me. On a more personal level, I am also a mom of, I joke 3 or 4, depending on how you cut it, children. So I have 3 children of my own. My daughter just turned 5. My son is 12, and then I have another son that's 15. But about 7-8 years ago, I also had an exchange daughter that came to live with us. She's 25 now, and I still consider her part of my family, which is why I joke that it's either 3 or 4, depending on how you cut it. But I definitely feel that family is who you choose. And there are many of my friends and colleagues who I would also consider family. We live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, although I travel often for work, which I'm very grateful for because it gives me a perspective outside of my hometown. And values that I live by, I definitely am driven by inclusivity, accepting people that are different than you are, making sure to create safe spaces for them. The DEI work that we do that is part of our everyday work at Public Knowledge, both internally and with our clients, is very, very important to me and is a big part of the values that I live by and what I am driven by both personally and professionally. And then I would say the other value that I really am driven by is just a big sense of optimism and hope and possibility. I definitely can jump back from disappointments and failures pretty easily. That resilience comes naturally to me. And I think because I am driven values-wise by a lot of optimism and hope and seeing a lot of the positive and joyful things in life, even when things are hard, which has served me well, especially taking over Public Knowledge in January 2020, 2 months before a global pandemic hit. But also, I think gives a lot of hope and possibility to the team and to the firm. So today we're going to do a little different. We're going to listen. I'm going to actually share with you a little bit more about what organizational change management is and what the process looks like. And then we're going to hear from Kassie Graham, who is our Senior Vice President of Business Development here at the firm. And she's going to talk in a little bit more detail about the why behind change management, why it's so important, why we believe in it, why you need it, and what happens if you don't have it. And she's got a great story about a soda company that I think you'll enjoy. And then we will move on to have the guest of our podcast, Allison and myself, will talk a little bit more in detail about the impact of change management and what that looks like moving our work forward. OCM stands for Organizational Change Management, and it's actually a tool used to prepare people for change and get them to buy in and get more excited about the change so that change is easier. You actually have people fall into 3 different categories when it comes to change. Some are very resistant. They don't want to change. They're going to wait until the last possible minute to change, and they're going to fight you all along the way. I'm sure that you've worked with many of those. And you have on the other extreme the early adopters that are like jumping in 2 feet first, probably before you're ready for them to change. The system's out there and they're jumping in already using it. And then the ones in the middle that are going to kind of wait and see how those early adopters go. They'll change at some point, but it's going to take some time. We actually have different methods for addressing all different types of people when it comes to OCM. And part of the process is getting each individual bought in so that collectively the organization can change. Until you address each individual and their awareness and their need and their want to change, nothing moves. And you have people fighting against you. You may have a few early adopters who are doing really good with the change, but the majority of your organization is left behind. And you have quite a few of them saying, what the heck are we doing and why are we doing this? And fighting you all along the way. And a large group that's just kind of waiting to see, is this actually going to stick? Is this a change that we're going to actually follow through with this time? Is it something I need? And until you can prove that to them, they're not going to make the shift. So we think about OCM and change management as you have all of these squiggly lines, all of this work happening over here on the left. We come in, we apply OCM, and then you have straight lines straight to the end goal. So it's a matter of saying, okay, where are we now? And where do we need to go? So if we go with our theory at Public Knowledge that you have to address every individual in order to get them to change, it sounds really complicated. It sounds really hard. It sounds like we have to have a different approach for every single individual.
but that's not the case. Many OCM tools will hit at many different types of people, and will hit at very many different types of needs in the organization for that change. So we have a continuous process of assessing and implementing organizational change management. It starts with discovery, and then it goes to prepare, and then it goes to create. And we have different tools for each one. So in the discovery phase, we are getting to know your organization, getting to know your team, getting to know your staff, getting to know what types of change individuals you have at your organization. Like I said, you're going to have all three types, but we want to know, do you have more of one type than another? Lots of organizations do. Some are really adept and nimble and change often, and so they have a lot of early adopters. They tend to attract more early adopters. And some don't change very often. They're very heavily regulated, potentially stuck in a lot of different processes and procedures. Everything's documented. You follow that. And so you have a lot in the other category of those that are really resistant to that change. We're going to come in and do this discovery process where we're assessing what people know about the change. Are they excited about it? Are they not? What would help them understand the change better and help them do their jobs better? And we use different qualitative and quantitative discovery tools to do this. So the most common ones are surveys and interviews and focus groups, but we have a lot of other tools in our toolbox for the discovery phase. After we finish the discovery phase, we move into the prepare phase. This is all about planning. So this is taking all of the world and the research and the methodologies around organizational change management and creating a specific individualized plan for your organization and for your change. And what we're doing in that process is we're saying, okay, what is your vision? Where are your needs that we found out in the discovery phase? And then what tools might we create and plan for that would help address those needs and prepare your organization and your people for the change? And so in this phase at the end, we have a master OCM plan that has very detailed instructions and plans around the timelines and the tools that we'll be using in the creation phase. In the creation phase, we're using everything in our toolbox that is a tool of OCM in order to affect and influence the individuals, your teams, your leadership, and ultimately your organization. Sometimes we're also using tools to affect stakeholders that are external to the company, because oftentimes these change will affect other people outside of our company as well as those inside. Okay, we have a lot of tools in our creation toolbox, but they all hit at 4 different levels. So we have the individual, the teams, and the leadership, and the organization. So for individuals and external stakeholders both, we have tools that are aimed at answering the question, which is, what is in it for me? Again, our theory is that individuals don't change unless they understand the why behind it and why it's going to be better for them. If it's not better for them, why would they make the change? Why would they learn a new tool? Why would they learn a new technology? And so all of our creation tools at the individual level are aimed at the individual and influencing and answering that question for them. Our tools for leadership are a little different. These tools are aimed at, how do I lead change? There's no way that a change is going to be effective at a company or an organization unless the leaders are behind it, unless they're leading it, unless they are influencing the people at the company to say, this is what we need to do it now, and building a case for change. And so for leaders, we're really looking at, how do you influence? How do you have good team building skills? How do you have good leadership skills? How do you lead change within your organization? And we have creation tools aimed at answering that question for your leaders. Our creation tools for teams are a little different. This is aiming at the question of, what can we achieve together? So oftentimes during the discovery phase, we're assessing how effective your teams are, because without effective teams, most of your work is not going to get done, including your change. So oftentimes change efforts in OCM rely on teams within your organization that are working very effectively together to help be champions for the change and to help get excited and celebrate the different changes and the different milestones within your change. And then the last area of OCM tools that we have in our toolbox are for the organization. And for the organization, the question is, what can we achieve together? What is possible? And that's a really exciting question to answer. This is all about setting vision and strategy and really dreaming about what it is you're trying to affect, what it is you're trying to achieve, and what's the impact and the outcomes that you want at the end of the day through your change project, whether that's a technology or not. We want to say, okay, looking down the road at the end of this process, what do we want to see in place? What's possible? And really dream and vision that with your leadership and your entire organization so that everyone can get behind what it is you're trying to get to. This process of the discovery phase, the planning phase, and the creation phase is meant to be a continuous one. So within every OCM project, we are, once we get through all those 3 phases, going back to reassess the organization. We actually set benchmarks for our change. How do we measure it, and how do we measure success? And then we look to see if we've achieved that. If we have, great, we continue doing the same thing. We plan out for the next phase, and we use those same creation tools. But sometimes we get in and we realize this isn't working for this organization. The people aren't behind it. They're not being influenced by the tools that we're using. And so we'll readjust. We'll move the needle. We'll come up with a new plan for phase 2, and then we'll find new creation tools that will help your organization move your change forward. This process is continuous. That's why I set in a circle, and it can happen as many times as needed. If it's a short-term change, we're probably only going through that cycle once, maybe twice. If it's a long-term change, it can happen many times. Sometimes we decide to reassess every 6 months or every year, depending on the length of the project. Is it 2, 3, 5, 10 years long? The last thing I want to say about public knowledge and our approach to organizational change management is that we know that no 2 organizations and no 2 change projects are the same. And many people will come in an OCM project and say, these are the 6 things that we know you can do and you will have success. We know from 30 plus years of OCM work, that's simply not true. It's not that simple. People aren't that simple. Organizations aren't that simple. And change surely is not that simple. So we definitely have a process and we have a lot of tools in our toolbox. But part of what makes us unique is that we're adapting them to your needs and your organization. What are the communication tools that are going to help with your team and your individuals the most? What are the different things that we can put into your communications, the different messages? What's the frequency? What meetings are you already having that we can work through so that we're not adding more work to your plate and your team's plate? Because we know in this day and age, everyone's busy, everyone has a lot of things on their plate, and taking their eye off of their core mission and their core vision is really hard for organizations to do. So we try to keep you focused on that. And then we help support you from behind, crafting messages, crafting communications, helping to set up change guides and change champions, and really assessing how that's going and making sure that your change is exactly the success that you wanted it to be.
Who doesn't know about Coke, right? They're a corporate giant and an industry leader. But do you know about the time they failed badly? It was in the early 80s. Coke decided to change their recipe and they introduced the new Coke. It was different. Coke spent millions of dollars developing it. They conducted taste tests with over 200,000 people, and the tasters loved it. So they released the new Coke in April 1985. They were confident the new Coke would re-energize their brand. While it didn't, people revolted. They wanted their old Coke back. Coke spent over $4 million in research and development of the new Coke. They lost another $30 million in new Coke backstock because nobody would drink it. By the way, that $30 million is $114 million today. So what happened? 80 days later, they brought the old Coke back. So what does the story of Coke really teach us about change? Hi, I'm excited to see you today. I'm Kassie Graham, a certified change management practitioner and vice president of sales for Public Knowledge. Today, I'm going to highlight the profound impact that people have on how we implement technology. I will share with you ways you can improve adoption and increase the success of even your most challenging implementation. Just as any other planning efforts for your technology deployment, OCM requires planning, intention, and OCM must be monitored and controlled, just like your project management. In fact, data shows that projects with effective change management practices are 5 to 6 times more successful than projects that did not address the people side of change effectively. We do have data demonstrating the correlation between change management effectiveness and projects that meet or exceed their objectives. Using this data from 2,700 change practitioners, we can show that projects with excellent change management in place are 6 times more likely to meet objectives than those with poor change management. Even those projects using good change management principles are 5 times more likely to meet project objectives. It seems like a no-brainer. So let's talk about that. This is the important question to ask yourself. How are your people critical to your technology's success? And while that may seem like a simple answer, they use it, and you spent an inordinate amount of time trying to design the usability into your system or your implementation or your tools. But really, how critical are they to actually helping you implement it as well? Let's think back about New Coke. Why was it such a huge failure? What if Coke had enlisted change champions to promote the benefits of the new recipe? What if Coke had just told consumers why they had to change the recipe? What if, and this is controversial, what if they had just slowed down the launch? What if they had communicated about it better? Perhaps established better two-way checkpoints with their consumers? Structured OCM practices shows that the more we engage our people in change and show them what's in it for them, or the with them, the greater our combined success. If Coke had used OCM, would they have saved millions and avoided the old Coke, new Coke saga? Now think about your change. Consider the impact to your users. Be very intentional and clearly and carefully identify ways to show what's in it for them. And also identify what's in it for me may not be what's in it for you, may not be what's in it for our leadership. And that's the important distinction. Make sure that you identify what's in it for all of your users and help demonstrate that and demonstrate the benefits. So I know you're thinking at this point, it's been really fun learning about Coke and their failures with their new Coke launch. But when are you going to finally give me something I can actually take action on? So here we go. The prevailing feedback I hear from my clients is that they wish they had started OCM earlier. Not one of my clients have ever said, yeah, I probably could have waited just a little bit, especially to think about organizational readiness. I mean, I'm just in testing now. So let me share a story with you. Last year, I had the pleasure of speaking on a panel with 2 of my clients. They were talking about their lessons learned from implementing each of their over $100 million healthcare claims processing systems. One client introduced OCM principles after they had a really difficult launch. And based on feedback from that client, the other client hired us 1 year prior to the launch. And I will tell you, in this discussion about lessons learned, both clients couldn't stress enough that they both wish they had started their OCM planning at the same time as their project management initiation, way back in the early stages of a 5-year implementation. So better yet, OCM planning happens while you're writing the business case. It gives you the opportunity to really think through where and why people may resist the change or where it will impact them the hardest. And then you'll find opportunities to invite them to the table early. It is critical to start folding in your approach and activities early in order to avoid costly mistakes in design and implementation. We all know that, but thinking about it from the with them point of view is really the important distinction to make from standard project management or even systems or implementation design. For those of you who are in the middle of your deployment or even in user acceptance testing, I do really advocate that there's no such thing as too late. It's really important to review your communication and implementation strategies throughout, particularly as it comes down to the users. And then you realign them with what you're hearing from the users. So the one-time training that you may have scheduled may not be enough for all of your staff. For your security team, absolutely. They just may need to have one training to learn the new ins and outs of the new technology that you're implementing versus then your business people, policy people, they have no idea. They know that you told them not to click on an email, and that's about it. Meet your users where they are, and you will see tremendous gains. Second point I'd like to make is that effective change management must start at the top of the organization. Strong leadership is the single most important element for successful organizational change. We understand that from an implementation standpoint, but also from the OCM, the change management aspect. Be sure to work with your leadership and your project teams to ensure that there is alignment between the two. And this includes alignment on individual roles, organizational structure, and business processes that are needed to support any technology transformation. It is critical that sponsors, leaders, and managers are all equipped with the tools and knowledge to help them lead your organization through any change. And this starts with educating them on change management principles. This also includes training and real-time coaching. And this real-time coaching helps them identify barriers to change, as well as providing them with tools and techniques to put in their toolbox to effectively support staff that may be resistant to the change. And really, the last point I want to make on this is that leading OCM from the top is more than just an executive bullet point reporting out or communication about a project. The most effective leaders engage personally with staff to demonstrate the benefits of the change, to show that they believe in the future state of the change, and that they're there digging in and helping remove the barriers and advocating for the change. One other thing is keep it real, which brings us to the communication. Communication is critical. Successful adoption increases when you involve staff along the way, and OCM communication is more than just project status reporting. It is stakeholder management, but also keeping in mind, again, the what's in it for them, the WIFM, but it sets users' expectations. As I said earlier, be sure to keep it real. Make the future state tangible so that the staff better understand the changes that will be coming. And this is done through clear, timely, and accurate communications about project progress. This also includes how and when users will be impacted. It is also important to highlight the benefits the technology will bring to individuals. Communication is most effective when bidirectional, meaning you and leadership are spending equal amount of time listening, and then using that information to adjust your strategies and messaging, and even timing to meet the user's needs. As part of communication, we recommend developing a change agent network. And I know what you're thinking. No, I'm not telling you to go find the Jason Bourne of change. Change agents are not super or spies enlisted to take out those with bad attitudes or find pockets of users planning to foil your implementation. But change agents are staff from within your organization that do have a realistic view of day-to-day work. And this makes them powerful because they're empathetic to how changes will impact individuals and teams. Change agents must reflect every level and every role in the organization. And they're usually go-to staff that are already respected by their peers. I've also seen some of my clients find that particular group or that representative from the particular area that may be most resistant and helping get them really well educated on the changes. It will help you coordinate and build bridges between leaders and staff. Again, if you identify someone that is a resistant agent and you flip them, then they will then become one of your strongest advocates for the change. Change agents also act as early adopters and champions for the project, and that helps them. It helps you break down resistance and build excitement for the project among their peers. Change agents often become proficient in their change roles, and we see time and time again that once they've been trained and are an effective change manager, then they can be used for future transformation projects. So how do we know OCM is working? If we don't measure it, did it happen? Do we know we were successful? Metrics tell us whether the desired transformation has occurred. And in my experience with implementing technology over the last 20 years, the system or implementation is always ready for the people, far before the people are willing or ready to use it. Waiting for users is not an option with cybersecurity deployments, though. There's too much at risk. But do keep in mind that the rapid deployments impact other critical performance measures that must be understood and communicated proactively. Otherwise, you will likely see old habits and workarounds creep up. Use of and monitoring of metrics will demonstrate whether and where you may encounter potential roadblocks to your implementation. I recommend metrics that are quantifiable indicators of both technology readiness and user readiness to do their jobs in a new way, and sometimes in a vastly new way. Be careful to craft your metrics and ensure that they dive into specific readiness factors and identify the degree to which they are in place prior to deployment. And be sure to establish a baseline to measure progress throughout your change. And I wouldn't be doing a good job of helping you if I didn't offer some examples, like find out if users are even aware of your change and make sure that they are aware of why it's happening. Know if users understand the change and how it impacts them personally. And as your go live approaches or your launch approaches, track the number of users trained versus the number of users that are confident in their ability to complete the job functions after the implementation or deployment. Use OCM-driven assessments, so focusing on the people, and use that to gather your data and align them with critical milestones throughout your project implementation. This will allow you to continually monitor user readiness and their ability to adopt to the changes. And finally, many of your projects are part of a long-term transformation effort. So be sure to include some short duration activities that solve important problems and demonstrate successful impacts that you are able to make along the way. So thinking back to my first point about starting early, when you integrate OCM with project management, initiation, and planning, you can thoughtfully build in milestones for success, and you can actually create those opportunities to celebrate. Use those celebrations and recognition to reinforce your change. Without being mindful about this, oftentimes people will revert back to their old ways. It is really important to build in reinforcement opportunities to change the culture around how technology is used and change the culture about why the changes are being made. In fact, oftentimes, as painful as a change or an implementation started, it's continually reinforced a year or 2 years later. You may not even remember that you had to change, or you'll joke about, do you remember the old way we used to do this? There's no way I would go back to that. Watch for the achievement of milestones and identify early successes, even if small. I know this is hard to do, but make sure you take pause between activities and look back and mark the successes that you have had. We have all been to the company pizza party after a big milestone, but let's use these opportunities, even if they are virtual right now, but use them to recognize individual contributions and do so in a way that makes them comfortable. Because, not everyone likes public recognition, but they do like to be recognized. I'm sure you all have good ideas for celebrations, so I don't need to talk to you about how what your parties could look like. But make sure that they include an authentic moment to thank a group or an individual. It's really powerful to invite and engage one of your leaders to visit with the group and thank them in person, or even call a small group meeting and have them interact one-on-one if it's not something that's usually done. It goes a long way. Be sure to include project sponsors in any celebration. One of my clients' leadership team actually hosted a staff lunch after their large implementation. The leadership team, about 5 of them, all dressed up in chef's hats and aprons, and they served lunch to the staff. I thought it was pretty cool. 4 years later, staff still tell stories about the CEO in his chef's hat and frilly apron. Celebrating your successes increases morale and builds support among those making the change. Even when finding funds is really difficult, these celebrations don't really need to break the bank. Truly, a simple thank you from a supervisor can go a long way. Let's be honest, even you will likely need these moments as much as the rest of your organization. If I leave you with one nugget today, it is this. Never underestimate the power of communication. Communicate early, communicate often. Communicate in different ways, using different tools and different techniques. And perhaps most importantly, listen. Listen to what your users have to say, and be sure you find an appropriate way to respond. You must incorporate your users in that change or you will fail.
Allison, tell us a bit about yourself, what you do for work right now, and how you got here.
Well, thanks for having me, Stacey. I'm Allison Olson. I am the Learning Practice Director at PK. I have been at Public Knowledge for just over 5 years and have gotten to work with Stacey for almost 10 years, some time before PK, and kind of worked in child welfare training and facilitation, learning and education, and I'm just bringing that to my work at PK.
What did you do before PK?
I was a consultant working with state child welfare agencies contracted to the federal government just prior to PK, which is how we met. And before that, I worked in policy work at the state level in Wisconsin. And prior to that, did direct service running a group home for adolescent boys.
All right. So let's get to know you a little bit more on a personal level. Tell us who you are outside of work and what values you live by.
Who I am outside of work. I live in Boise, Idaho now, and actually my entire immediate family lives there now. We've kind of slowly moved there over the years, and it's wonderful having my brother, my parents, and everybody there. I am engaged to be married, getting married in about a month, which is pretty exciting. And so my fiance and I spend a lot of time with our dog and our families. My to-be mother-in-law lives in Boise as well, so we get to spend a lot of time with family.
Awesome. And tell us a bit about the fur baby.
Ghost is the coolest dog ever. He's a husky mixed with Malamute, we think. Not exactly sure, but he's got the greatest personality of any dog I've ever met. He's pretty awesome.
Yeah, so at PK, we talk about babies and fur babies because, not everyone has human ones, right? All right, well, let's talk a little bit about what we're here to talk about today. So if we think about organizational change management, how you prepare the people or organization for change and make sure that they actually accept that change and move from like as is to be. I'm curious what you think learning has, what's the role of learning in that change management process?
Yeah, I think it's really an integral part of any change because in order for people to buy in, so to get from where they are now to where we want them to get to, they have to learn about what the change is, what it looks like, and most importantly, really what it means for them and how it impacts them. So having that ability to teach people about what's happening now, why it needs to change, what's coming, and what that impact will be, I think is the way to get people bought in. And you can do that through communication. You can do that through traditional training. You can do it through like resources, job aids, things like that. So it's not all traditionally what we think of as training. There's lots of different ways to educate people on a change and get them to come along.
Tell us a little bit about what hybrid learning is. So if we're talking about different modalities of learning or training, what would it be in a hybrid environment?
So in a hybrid environment, you'd have a couple different ways to deliver information. You can start with delivering e-learning or using a video or a webinar type modality and delivering information that way just to get a message out to a lot of people in a short amount of time. And then you can follow that up with classroom training or like a town hall or a conversation, something in person. So you get both that kind of convenient training that you can pull up anytime, and then you follow that up with a discussion so you have some interaction and feedback.
And is the feedback really aimed at trying to understand how it's applied or how it might work in their environment, or just confirming knowledge and understanding?
It would be both, and it kind of depends on what information you're sharing. So if it's a new IT system that's coming, you want to train people on how to work in that system and how to do their work. So how to click through screens and how to document information. But you're also talking at the same time about how this changes their daily work. So is it saving them from doing paperwork? Is it speeding up something that they can do so they have more time to spend with families, and how that affects their day-to-day work? So it really is both.
Yeah, that buy-in, I feel like when we've worked on projects before, that the buy-in and the engagement to the change is such a huge part of the success, right? The technology can do it no matter what, but how do you get people to actually engage and buy in that it's worthwhile to learn something incredibly new?
Absolutely. And it's such an indicator of progress and success, because especially if you have folks who've been doing their work the same way for 30 years, that's a big change. And then at the same time, you have people who have done this work for 2 years and they're excited for something new. And so trying to balance that out and get that buy-in and really focus on what does this mean for me and how does it impact my day and my work is such a big part of, I think, every project we've ever done. And you can teach the skill. Like that's the easy part, but getting people to engage in the change and see how their work is going to change and how it can improve, and really trying to convince them that this is for the better to, help improve their efficiency and their productivity.
I think often, especially when we look at when the change is an IT system, people think, oh, this project failed because the system couldn't do what it needed to do, or the technology didn't work. And especially these days with technology changing so quickly, it's obvious it's not the technology, right? It's how do you get the people ready for it and get them moving and engaged. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that we've done that before. So I know sometimes we use change champions. Let's share with the audience a little bit. What are change champions and what's their role?
Sure. So when we think about change champions, we're really trying to identify who those people are who can have influence over other folks on their team, in their agency, in their department, to kind of explain what this change is, who it's going to impact, how it changes the work, and why it's important and exciting and useful. And really using those folks to deliver those messages constantly and kind of filtering messages through them. So you can check out that information with them, make sure they buy into it, so then they can go and essentially sell it to their teams.
So if I'm looking at who should be a change champion, am I trying to find people that are excited about the change or that are really resistant? Like, where on that continuum am I looking?
You can kind of look at both. And obviously the people who are most excited are going to be the ones who sign up first, and they're going to have the loudest voices. But it's also really exciting and rewarding to get those people who are more reluctant and get them to buy in, because then they are going to be your loudest cheerleaders. If they can see, like, oh yeah, this works for me. I didn't think it was going to, but here I am, and it's wonderful. And now I'm going to shout it from the rooftops that this is the best way to go.
Yeah. I'm like the early adopter. Like, I want all the change. Give it to me. So I'm like really easy to convince. But often I look around and I'm like, oh, how do I get the rest of, the people that are more reluctant or more fearful of change? And, we all approach change in different ways. So not everyone comes at it from my point of view. And if you think about people that are slower to make that change, other people, right, might be looking to them for their acceptance of that, which is very powerful.
It is. I mean, I think way back to when I was administering foster parent training at the state, and we had foster parents who had been doing this for 30 years and had never touched a computer. And we all of a sudden said, now you get to do online learning. And I kept this email for so long from a foster parent who was probably in his late 60s and said, I didn't want to do this. I was not excited about this. I started that training last night and I did all 6 hours of it in one sitting. It was awesome. And that was the most gratifying thing I think I heard about that entire training process.
Yeah.
It was great.
So tell me a little bit more about the why. Like, why do we need learning? Why do we need training? What's the purpose on, let's just say, an IT change management project?
Sure. So again, we need training for an IT project. People need to know how their work is going to change, and they need to know how to document a case note in this new way, because they have to do that multiple times a day, every day. And so they need to know from the beginning, this is how I'm going to do my work when this system is implemented. And without training and learning, they don't have that context. All they know is that the change is coming. I'm going to do my work differently, but I still have to get to the same end result of having a case note to hand to a judge. And so we need to train people at every level of an organization to say, this is what's happening. This is how it impacts you, whether it doesn't impact you much at all, or it changes the way you're making every decision. So the purpose of training and learning is really to explain to people how their work is going to change, how their job is going to change, and how they can come along with that and what the impact will be.
Okay. And I know that we do like instructor-led training, right? Live training, but we also more recently have been doing a lot more e-learning. Yes. What's the value of e-learning over instructor-led training? Why would someone want to spend that time and effort?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say one is more valuable than the other. I would say in certain situations you want to use instructor-led training or ILT or e-learning. And e-learning is super valuable if you have to get information out, like I said before, to a lot of people really quickly and be able to go back to it repeatedly to get refreshers on for instance, clicking through an IT system and figuring out how to document a case note. And then when you want to follow that up with instructor-led training or virtual instructor-led training that you can do over video conferencing, is when you want to have some interaction around that topic and you want people to be able to give and receive feedback and practice a skill. So if it's a training about interviewing, that's not necessarily something you want to do in an e-learning because people don't have the opportunity to sit and have a conversation and practice all the roles in an interviewing scenario. You want to be able to do that in a room with an instructor who can stop you in real time and say, hey, try this type of question or phrase things this way. And so you mentioned hybrid learning earlier. It's a great way to get kind of the best of both worlds because you can get that information to folks quickly, have the refreshers there for them, and then be able to have that conversation in person.
Yeah, I think of two other areas where e-learning comes in handy. One is also where like scheduling a training with everyone is so difficult.
Yep.
And so the ability of someone to watch that training or take that training at any time, right? Morning or night or whenever. Even if it's hybrid, then you're only scheduling for a shorter period of time that's actually in person with a group. And the other one that comes to mind, so many of our clients are dealing with high levels of turnover right now. So training your current workforce is one thing, but your current workforce might look very different in a month just because of attrition and new hires. So having that e-learning there allows you to train new, as part of onboarding or new employees, that helps you deal with that attrition a little better.
Absolutely. And e-learning is just, it's so accessible because you have exactly what you're saying. Like people can come to it at any time. And then if you have folks who have gone through an e-learning and then you have new people coming on, they can have a conversation. So they're kind of creating their own hybrid environment to share that information and kind of react to it. And there's lots of benefits to e-learning in multiple different ways.
Yeah. One of our core values at PK is impact, as you know, and we've created this podcast around it because it's really essential to our work. So for us at PK, impact means that we approach every engagement with our energy focused on identifying the right goals, outcomes, and strategies, and that we each have a personal responsibility to make a positive impact on our projects and our clients and our world. I'm curious, Allison, what does impact mean to you?
So to me, as somebody who has spent most of my career in child welfare, impact to me is leaving a family, a situation better than we found it, and making a difference for one person or thousands of people. That's the way we can impact our clients, our communities, can make that impact in lots of different ways.
So what kind of impact do you hope to have on this world?
Oh, gosh.
Deep question.
I guess. I think it's making a difference for, even if it's one person. To me, that's a legacy, and being able to have an impact on my peers and being able to bring learning to PK and expand our learning offerings is making an impact. Being able to bring this to our clients to say, here's how you can educate your folks and bring them along with you. That's making an impact for our clients and for their clients and their stakeholders. And on a personal level, like I said, having worked in child welfare for a really long time, being able to work with families and lots of kids, I think that's the lasting impact I would like to leave.
So what do we look for to change, or what impact do we look for when we're doing learning? So either ITL or e-learning, what is it that we're looking to impact or change?
I think when we're thinking about it in the vein of our people services, we're really looking at engagement and buy-in and kind of changing the way people can do their work. I think about a lot of different learning products that we've created, and it's getting people the information they need, whether it's brand new staff learning about how they do their job as a caseworker or how they administer Medicaid, getting that information to them so they feel well equipped and supported to do their work.
Yeah, I think that also just seeing that change is pretty exciting.
It is.
And we're definitely starting to figure out how we measure that change or measure that impact a little bit more. What kind of impact do you think that data and that information is going to have?
I think the data, I mean, there's plenty of quantitative data we can gather that can show an impact to our current and our prospective clients to literally say, here's what the transfer of learning looked like before this course was administered, and here's what it looks like now. Like, people now have the information to do their jobs, and you can do that through a pre and post test. You can do that through looking at metrics specific to their role, whether it's child welfare, Medicaid, whatever it might be. There are specific metrics attached to each of those roles. And I think as we deliver these curricula, we can see kind of how those shifts and how those trends change over time and be able to use that as we're proposing new work.
I also think measuring that knowledge change, right, and making sure that that training actually had the effect that we wanted it to have.
Yes.
I think we can all think of terrible trainings that we've sat in. I'm like the world's worst critic, right? But you think about, especially at the early part of my career, things that I sat through in a room or that I clicked through on a computer and taught me nothing, right? But there was still a big investment of someone's time and energy in that training. And so being able to actually show that it had that immediate effect that we wanted to, not just satisfaction, but also knowledge gain or knowledge transfer.
Absolutely. And I mean, we've all taken those pre and post tests, and some of the, those questions sometimes can even be terrible. And we have seen on the work we've done already that we also have the agility to change those questions and kind of revise if we're not seeing what we need to see, or if we're seeing people get tripped up on the same question consistently. We can make those adjustments and figure out what we actually need to measure and how we need to gather that information. So it is fascinating just to look at how we're gathering that and what it's telling us about the training and what it's telling us about our evaluation too.
You actually foreshadowed very well about where I'm heading. So no surprise there. But so each quarter, our podcast has a different theme. And this quarter, our theme is adaptability. So like agility, but adaptability. And adaptability is defined as the ability to adjust to a different condition or a different circumstance. So when you think about our work in change management and learning and adaptability, what do you think of, or what kind of emotions or thoughts come up for you?
I mean, I think of how adaptable everyone has been in the last 3 years, like how much we've all had to adapt and change, and how we were all kind of forced to be okay with doing e-learning or doing video calls and training over Zoom. And we have figured it out. I mean, we have figured out ways to get information to people. We've had Zoom trainings with large groups of people, and we've still found ways to make them inclusive, interactive, and engaging by using the technology. We can put people in breakout rooms. We can still do activities. We can use the whiteboard on Zoom to have conversations to bring gamification to an ILT or a VILT session. And we've been able to adapt to that. We've been able to adapt e-learning to fit our attention spans now, that we've all been on Zoom for 3 years constantly. Like, no one can sit through an hour-long e-learning. We know how to break those things up into smaller, digestible chunks and give people the freedom to step away and come back and meet people where they are. I mean, e-learning does that just by virtue of how it's set up, that if you prefer to look at it at 11 o'clock at night, you can do that. Like, if that fits better in your life, we can be adaptable and create something that gives you that freedom.
Yeah. What has our team had to kind of adapt to when it comes to this area of work over the last, let's just say, 5 years or so?
I think getting used to new ways of delivering training and learning and thinking about education in different ways, because we have so many clients who come to us and say, well, we need training. And instead of 5 or 10 years ago saying, okay, we'll create something, now we're able to know more and have the conversation to say, do you really need training? Or do you need resources? Do you need a conversation? Do you need a job aid? Or do you need a curriculum? And I think kind of shifting the focus to that needs assessment at the beginning of our process tells us so much of what we need to know about any project, any need of a client, to really dig into that and see if what they came in the door with is what they actually need. And then the exciting part for us is figuring out how we deliver on it and how we create something that's going to meet those needs.
Yeah, you talked about that early assessment, and I think about our change management projects and OCM, and really it's all about adaptability, our processes, right? So we start with that first assessment to say, okay, where is the workforce? Like, what do they prefer? What do they need? Like, we're really customizing. We have a toolbox, right? We have a lot of tools in our toolbox, but what tools we actually use or what interventions we use with a client is very tailored to them, right?
Absolutely.
We then do that work, we use those tools, and then we reassess, and then we're adapting again, right? We're reacting to those changing conditions, and we're saying, okay, what worked, what didn't for our clients' workforces, and they're all different, right? Like I think of all the different clients that we've worked with, and they are so different, like every state, every agency, and so being able to make that adapt to the needs of that agency and that workforce and that state is definitely a huge piece. It's not repeatable work.
It's not. And, so much of what we focus on, especially with e-learning, is customizing things. Our approach is the same. We're coming into it with the needs assessment and figuring out what's going to meet those needs. But then we can tailor kind of whatever they need, and we can pivot when we need to. And we can, talk about things that clients may not have thought about at the beginning. And we can adapt to that easily. And that's the exciting part, is figuring out what that looks like. And then ending, like you said, with that lessons learned to say, okay, did this get us where we needed to go? If so, great. If not, how are we doing this differently next time?
Yeah. And so our approach is definitely our PK OCM methodology, but it's built on some standards. So why don't you tell a little bit about what those industry standards are that we're using?
So we really focus with our development using the ADDIE model, designing, developing, deploying, and kind of looking at each of those phases in concert with the client to say, what do you need in this phase? How are we going to co-create the content? How are we going to walk you through our kind of established process of doing that assessment, creating a design plan, creating design documents, storyboards, beta versions, and then final versions, and kind of showing that to the client before we walk through them, and then walking through each of those together to get the high quality training and e-learning products that we're aiming to create.
Yeah, I feel like all of our work, we're using ADDIE, but we're also very focused on adult learners, right? Like most of our work is that. And then when we're using change management, we're basing it off of ProSci, which is a national, international certification. But we definitely adapt it. Like our project management methodology is very focused on people, because we know that that's usually where the errors and breakdowns and problems are, is right, people problems. And they're so fun to solve, but they definitely require adapting because every person is very unique.
For sure.
So one of our aspirational values at the firm is progress, right? Which is all about the collective power of impact of an individual learning or an individual course or an individual project. And so we define progress as we want each engagement to build upon the last, advancing towards the goal of leaving the world better than when we started. And that is our ultimate reward for generating the evidence to understand what works and its impact. So talk to me a little bit more about these projects, these types of projects, both change management and learning projects. How are we contributing to progress over time, either for our organization or for our clients' organizations?
I think a lot of it is what we've already talked about with lessons learned. Like we come in, we have an idea of what the client needs. They certainly come in thinking they know what they need and knowing where they need to go and working together to address those needs, and then doing that reflecting piece that you talked about and saying what worked, what could be better. And we do that with our clients and we do it internally. And then we compile all that information to inform our decisions for the next project. So we're making that progress by saying, we're going to use all this information from our last interaction with the client to shift our outlook, to shift our perspective, to shift our approach, to say, well, we thought this was going to work last time. It didn't work like we wanted it to, so we're going to tweak it. And I think just having that kind of growth learning mindset to say we're always going to shift this as we need to make it better for the next project, the next client. I think that's how we get to that progress piece.
I'm laughing over here because you can tell that we've worked together for a long time. Because of course my answer to progress is lessons learned. So for me, progress is all about lessons learned. And whether we fail or we win, right? Whether we have success or failure, we're still learning from that. And often I think we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes.
I agree.
Because we can take that, right, and pass it on to future projects or future clients. So let's think about some lessons learned that we have from some of our change management projects and some of our e-learning projects that we could share with our audience that they could maybe take to their next project or their next change that will ultimately move the needle and help make more progress.
Okay.
Any come to mind for you?
Yeah, the first things that I think of are that change takes longer than you think it does.
Every time.
Whether it's implementing a new system or creating the training product or creating an e-learning, there's more input than you think you need initially, because it's so important to get all of those perspectives, all of those viewpoints. Anyone who's going to touch this training or touch this change management process or be part of the final result has to have their voice heard from the beginning.
Yeah, the beginning part is so important. I always think of people, our clients and us, right? Internally, I do this too. We forget about the users or the people that are having the change, and we don't get them engaged early enough. And I think we've learned that lesson the hard way. We've watched our clients learn that the hard way. And so we start each project with those users, those ultimate users, or the ones that are being impacted very, very early on.
We do. And it's a sticking point on some of our projects because, as we all know, like, everything's in a hurry. So we want to get this done yesterday, but we can't go quickly and lose that piece, because then we're not going to get to the end result that we need. We're leaving people out in the process. And so, yes, it takes more time to hear all those voices. But what we've told clients over and over is, I promise you, it's going to get you where you need to go if you have those conversations from the beginning. Because if you don't, you're missing something. And if you miss it at the beginning, you can't get it back in the middle.
Yeah, it's that go slow to go fast.
Exactly. Somehow I knew you were going to say.
I know. So another lessons learned that I think of, thinking of a specific project that you and I were on 5 years ago or so, is the role of executives and executive sponsorship on the project. So I think often we'll come in, we'll talk with leadership about how important the project is. But like you said, because of time constraints and how busy our clients can be, sometimes we have a hard time getting their engagement in the projects because they're like, oh, you're here, you can help us do this. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons we've learned around executive sponsorship.
Absolutely. I think, it's again that we need every level of an agency or of an organization to be bought in. And we've definitely had some projects, some experiences where we have a director saying, this is what we need. Please go, create this and bring it back to us. And our response is, okay, but we need to hear from every single person or every single role in this. And we have hit some snags with that and had leadership kind of want to push through and say, I know this is what we need. We have data saying this. And that's super helpful. We also need those voices at the table. And I can think of a couple projects we've had where we've had to kind of push back to get to that point, and then had leadership be grateful for it in the end. But we've also had situations where we haven't been given that permission and we haven't been able to create what we wanted to create to the level we wanted because we didn't have that buy-in. We didn't know all of those perspectives.
Yeah. I think another lesson learned for me is that sometimes, and I do this too, right, at our firm, like sometimes we get so caught up in trying to and I deal with this with our leadership team too, like trying to create the best training or the most perfect training or the most perfect information, that we kind of get stuck or frozen in time rather than getting something out there and trying to iterate or being agile about how we change it or adapt it over time. What advice would you give the listeners or clients about that kind of that problem or that challenge?
I think that's where that needs assessment comes in. And it's so important from the beginning, because when you open that up to say, okay, what do people need to know? You're going to get a list a mile long, and you can refine the scope of a project to say, this is what they need to know now. And this is what, we need to get information out. Like you said, we need to tell them this piece of this. We can save the rest of this for later. They still need to know it, but we can parking lot that and deliver that in a different way at a later time. But we can prioritize the information we need to get out now and figure all that out in that assessment, and then build your product, your learning, your curriculum around that. And then don't forget to come back to the rest of it later.
Yeah. And it does take time, but I do think it's important to get something out there and start moving.
Absolutely. And like you said, we can be agile. And once we create curriculum, it's not set in stone forever. We can revise it. We can pilot these things and try them out on a smaller group of people, get feedback, and then make revisions, make adjustments. One of the other beautiful things about e-learning is it's easy to change. I know it's not simple all the time, but it's easy enough to make changes to that content and to, graphics and animations and things like that to change the message a little bit if we need to tweak something, or if it's not landing the way we want it to. We can make those changes without having to rewrite, a resource guide.
Yeah, I'm actually... I think our developers right now are like groaning and rolling their eyes when you said it was easy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It is easy for us because we don't have to do that part.
I can see our media lead shaking his head at me.
Yeah, we just have to say go. All right. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up here, but we built this podcast around one of our 3 core values, as you know, impact. But to close out every podcast, I've been asking each of our guests to share their wisdom on our other 2 core values with our audience, and you get a little added benefit of knowing what those are. So I just have 2 more final questions for you, and I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. But what I'm looking for is your best advice for our audience on achieving our other 2 core values, which are inclusion and teamwork, and I'll take one at a time. There really are no wrong answers here. It's really just supposed to be fun and a little giveaway, a little golden nugget for our listeners. So are you ready?
I am.
All right. So what is your best advice for achieving high levels of inclusion in the workforce?
I think it really goes back to what I said before, and I know it comes from my background in child welfare, but it's having every voice at the table. We used to say, you don't make decisions about us without us. And that was just so forefront in my mind when I was working with teenagers. And I still think about those kids, and I still think about that phrase as we're creating something for a transportation project. That totally different industry, the same philosophy applies. That everyone who's going to touch this or be touched by it has to be part of the conversation from the beginning.
Yeah, I love that. And the no decisions about us without us, I think applies in so many different contexts, right? And in the workplace every day too. How are we engaging our workforce too?
I agree. And I think it's so many decisions that we're making internally and with our clients that, again, decisions need to be made quickly. You can still gather that feedback from people, and it doesn't have to be, a 4-hour town hall where every person gets to speak. You're putting information out, and you're asking for people to give you feedback, give you input to say, this is how this impacts me, and this is what I need you to do about it. And just taking that information in openly.
Yeah, I think sometimes our clients are afraid to ask for that because they think they have to do something or, with all that information.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes they miss that the point is inclusion and voice, hearing that voice. It doesn't mean that you have to meet the needs of every single person, because that would be impossible.
Yep.
But that hearing of it is part of building that inclusion.
It is. It's not about making every person, happy with the decision, because that's where the learning and training comes in, is that you can engage people to buy into decisions that they may not initially have been part of or may not initially have been for. And you can do that. But I completely agree with you that listening and hearing that voice gets you to the inclusion by allowing people to speak up and share, and knowing that, there is pressure with that, because you do feel like you have to react to everything. But I think, as someone who's been part of both sides of that conversation, like just being able to say, hey, this is what I need. If I don't get it today, that's fine. But as long as you hear me and this is what I need, I've done what I need to do. I've told you what I need.
Well, so let's turn to teamwork. And I think this is kind of fun, because I've had the benefit of being on teams with you, both teams that you've led and teams that I've led and teams that we've just been peers on. Mm-hmm. And I know some pretty amazing teams, actually, that some of my favorite projects and favorite teams.
Definitely.
What is your best advice for achieving high levels of teamwork in the workplace? Like, how do we create that magic? Because sometimes it feels like magic.
It does feel like magic. And when you're in it, it's sometimes you don't always know it when you're in it. And then when you don't have it, it's even more apparent.
The lack of it is very painful.
It is painful. And I think I've gotten to the point now where I've been on so many amazing teams that I'm better at recognizing it when I'm in it. And I think having, like you said, led teams and being on teams that are great, to me, it's kind of the same as the inclusion, like making sure everyone has a seat at the table and gets to play their role, knows what their role is and how they can contribute, brings a lot of teamwork. To me, especially when I'm leading teams, like, it has to be fun. There has to be something fun about it, even if it's a really difficult project or a really stressful project. We still have to be able to have fun. And you know me well enough to know that my sense of humor is kind of what I lead with. I know some people are listening to this thinking kind of, but that is where I start, because I think that brings people in. Like, if we can still have fun, if we can still laugh, we can still get to know each other as people, that to me creates that teamwork. And that's like going back to when I was a kid on a basketball team.
Connection.
That's exactly it. Yeah, finding ways to connect with people, which is tough, right? When we're on Zoom all day, and when I'm sitting in Idaho and people on my team are sitting on the East Coast of Canada.
Yeah.
Like, that's tough, but
it's intention.
It absolutely does. And it's very intentional, and it's where we start with our teams. Like, right, we start with that connection. We find ways to get to know each other, even when we're thousands of miles apart. And I think one of the things that we do really well is we do the same thing with our clients.
Yeah. Well, they're just as important, if not more important.
Yep. And I think that's tough for people sometimes, because they think, well, we've got to get in and do the work, and we're not having fun. Like, we're getting this work done.
We're at work.
Yeah. And I do my best to have fun with our clients too, still get the work done, but find ways to get to know them as people and have fun, because it just makes the work more enjoyable. And it makes it easier.
Yeah. People think that when people say that work shouldn't be fun, I can't. I'm like, oh, well, now we're together.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of fun.
We have.
All right, friend. Well, I cannot thank you enough for your time today. It's a precious privilege to be able to be here with you, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share.
Thank you.
Until next time, this is Stacey signing off.